Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about this video and this subject that I found to be very particularly interesting. And, of course, for those of you that did not end up watching the fight as of yesterday, between that of Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko and also that of George Kambosos Jr., Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko was able to put a beating on that of Mr. George Kambosos Jr., which is pretty much over what I had predicted, throughout the fight because George Kambosos, if you just take a look at him, he's not the type of guy, he's not the type of style to beat that of Vasyl Lomachenko, even at his absolute best. And George Kambosos, in my view, at his best, is an A-minus level fighter. It is possible maybe that he took a little bit of wear and tear from the Lopez and Devin Haney fights. It's possible because, of course, in his last fight, a lot of people thought that he allegedly lost. Now, to be fair, I never really seen that. But at the end of the day, Lomachenko, of course, is able to put a beating on this man. I really didn't score the fight myself because, to be quite honest with you, I don't know if there was really a need to. Maybe there was one or two rounds that George Kambosos could have escaped with, but to be quite honest with you, at least from my recollection, it looked like Lomachenko was pretty much beating that man's ass, at least, especially after the first three rounds, But it is what it is. But like I said, I kind of predicted that because Lomachenko is a guy that can be very active throughout a fight, especially if you give him opportunities. Lomachenko is an extremely talented and gifted fighter. Yes, there is certain things that you can do to kind of limit him, but George Kambosos just didn't do enough of that yesterday. And I thought that, he was still, trying, at times his best. I think that, he was going to the body somewhat well. He was going there with right uppercuts and right hooks to the body, which is something that you have to do with Lomachenko because he doesn't defend the body very well. Partially overall because he has shorter arms, so it's a little bit harder for him to. He has a longer torso overall when it comes down to it, kind of exposing his stomach, but he has about a 65-inch arm reach. So Lomachenko a lot of the times tries to do his boxing in the mid-range, but his body is pretty much wide open, especially for a hook or an uppercut to the lower part of the body, So it is what it is. But anyways, like I said, this fight pretty much went down as I had predicted. But the question is now about Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko is where does he really go from here against overall Mr. George Kambosos and overall now that he has the IBF lightweight title of the world, who could he potentially fight? Well, apparently there are three options. Apparently there is Emmanuel Navarrete, who I believe right now is a 130-pound champion. There's Gervonta Davis, and there's also that of Shakur Stevenson. Which one could potentially be the best option, and which one do I think more than likely is going to happen? We're going to tune in. We're going to talk about it. Let's see what Mr. DontaesBoxingNation has to say.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Lomachenko, he got an 11th round stoppage over George Kambosos. He looked spectacular. I told you guys, for some reason, at 135, Lomachenko, he always looks spectacular when he's fighting against a guy that lost to the guy that he actually lost to. But with that being said,
Lomachenko right now, I believe, is 36 years old. And it's just very interesting because Dante's Boxing Nation, he won't call Lomachenko right now a grandpa. Even though, when he was fighting Devin Haney, it looks like Lomachenko, even though he's still very clearly at an A-grade point in his career, he probably has lost a little bit of speed just because of his age. And on top of that, his style. There's only so long that, in my view, you're going to be able to be that offensive for so long, especially when a lot of the times you're fighting guys that are bigger than you. But, when it comes down to, once again, it's just interesting because we all know what Dante said about Mayweather versus Canelo, which is that Mayweather was a grandpa in that fight against Canelo Alvarez and that he wasn't really at his peak or his prime anymore, even though he very clearly was. But it is what it is. And, of course, that was one of Mayweather's greatest performances. But I always like to comment on that because Dante will sit here and try to tell you, in order to demean Canelo Alvarez, that, Canelo, not only did he lose to Mayweather, but he lost to Mayweather when he really was nowhere near close to his prime. And that's bullshit. But it's just interesting overall how he doesn't say the same thing with Lomachenko. We're like, oh, well, yeah, you know what? Devin Haney, he beat Lomachenko, but not only did Devin Haney have a size advantage, but Lomachenko was 35 years old. You're never going to hear those same standards because Dante's Boxing Nation, once again, he can go about this race fan bullshit all he wants to. Dante is the king of the club. All right, Dante is the king of the pro-black, race fan club. That's what he is.
Lomachenko is one of the most dangerous fighters in the sport because of his extreme boxing IQ, his defense, and his accuracy. Some fan on the internet, on Twitter, Diego Myra, he said Gervonta would never fight Lomachenko. And Gervonta, he replied by saying, he's after Frank. Let me get Frank first. Guys, this is...
Well, we'll see about that, but it's just very particularly interesting because we all know overall what Dante would say if this was Canelo Alvarez. Once again, this is how you know that Dante's Boxing Nation has a lot of narratives up his ass and a lot of agendas. Because whenever it comes to Canelo, when he was about to fight Charlo or, Golovkin or something like that, oh, well, he fights Gennady Golovkin overall when Gennady Golovkin was 36 years old, right? So that means that if Gervonta Tank Davis fights Vasyl Lomachenko in his next fight, that must mean that Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting an old man, right? That must mean that Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting a guy that really doesn't belong in there with him. Is that what that means? You're not going to hear that from Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. And I always tell people this, just because a fighter is 36 years old does not mean that they're not possibly at their absolute peak, or that they're at least not debatably at their best, or at least at a very great spot in their career. Does anyone take a look at Lomachenko right now at 36 years old and say that this man overall is not an A-grade level fighter? Now, if you ask me, do I think that he's probably lost, a little bit of a step in terms of speed and, in terms of athleticism? Yeah, probably a little bit, but it's still very clearly there. His power is still there. His speed is still there. His footwork and his movement, of course, obviously is still there. But to be quite honest with you, Lomachenko, in my view, really has a bigger problem, which is the fact that Loma, if he's going to fight Gervonta Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson next especially, he's going to have to really try to put it on those guys. Because there's only so many times that Lomachenko is going to be able to get away with his excuse of that, oh, well, I'm fighting guys that are a little bit bigger and all sort of stuff. And, he likes to start a little bit late. Right, but you can't always do that against certain fighters. It just is what it is. Lomachenko against Gervonta Tank Davis and Shakur Stevenson, if he fights against those guys, he's going to have to be consistent and he's going to have to try to win that fight clearly. And I'm not talking about a Devin Haney situation, overall where it was a 6 rounds to 6 fight or 7 rounds to 5 fight, potentially going either way. If you're going to win that fight, you're going to have to potentially win it 8 rounds to 4, 9 rounds to 3, and you're going to have to win it relatively clearly. And even if you do that, you might only potentially get a draw because they don't overall want Vasyl Lomachenko to win those fights. And, Vasyl Lomachenko, once again, and I tell people this all the time, depending on your demographic and also depending on where you're from within that of the boxing world, I mean, really in life in general, you must realize, at times what you truly mean, to the atmosphere, what you truly mean overall, to the world around you. And what I mean by that is that it's important to know because it's going to depend. It's going to, overall show you what's eventually possibly going to happen to you later on, or how people treat you. And at the end of the day, Vasyl Lomachenko, he's not looked at as the belle of the ball. Lomachenko is not looked at as the golden boy. He's not looked at that. And there was only going to be a certain amount of time where he was looked at as the golden boy. He's looked at as the golden boy within those lower weight classes against, Guillermo Rigondeaux and Nicholas Walters and some of those other guys, where they don't have highly promoted American black fighters or American Latino fighters like that at Devin Haney or Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Tank Davis. But if you're fighting those guys, you're not overall going to get the decision over those guys in a close fight. At the end of the day, once again, I tell people this all the time, and it depends overall on where you're from. But like a lot of these European fighters, for example, same with black Cuban fighters or black African fighters or Argentinian fighters or Latino fighters that are not, from America, or are not from Mexico or Puerto Rico, and basically anywhere, a place where they're not highly promotable or a place, where they can't relate to a very great audience and earn a great amount of money off of you. Do not expect to be the A side in any of these fights. I don't care how many belts you have. I don't care. I don't care overall how many great wins you have. I don't care how dominant and skilled you are. You are not the A side. And that's what Vasyl Lomachenko needs to realize in some of these fights. He's not the A side against Teofimo Lopez. He's not the A side against that overall against Devin Haney. And he's certainly not going to be the A side against Shakur Stevenson or Gervonta Tank Davis. Now, in terms of a cut, he might be the A side in terms of that. But in terms of the favoritism of the judges and where they want this thing to go, he's not going to be the A side. Because Bob Arum realizes that he's going to have to hitch his wagon overall, to Shakur Stevenson's star, when it comes down to it. And now Heyman has to do the same thing with Gervonta Tank Davis. So once again, it's very important for Lomachenko that if he gets in those fights, he's basically going to have to sell out or go home. And what I mean by that is that Lomachenko is going to have to really try to put it on those fighters. He can't do this shit about, oh, well, I'm downloading data for the first 6 rounds and, overall, I really don't throw a whole lot, but then, I fight for real for the final 5 rounds. Lomachenko is going to have to fight tooth and nail, even if it potentially means him potentially getting stopped for the whole entire fight. The whole entire fight, period.
Great news to hear this straight from Gervonta. I've been waiting to hear this from Davis for years, because when Davis says this, that means the fight, it will happen. It doesn't matter if he's with PBC and Lomachenko's with ESPN.
It means it will happen, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. Let's cut the bullshit. Gervonta Tank Davis has been stating that he's going to fight this fighter and this fighter and this fighter and this fighter for years upon years upon years upon years. Gervonta Tank Davis is nothing but a Twitter talker. It's no offense against Gervonta Tank Davis. I like the dude. He's a great fighter. But at the end of the day, this man, how many times have we heard Gervonta Tank Davis say, "You're next," or overall, "Oh, I would knock this dude out," between Josh Taylor or Shakur Stevenson or Devin Haney or any one of these guys. And it never happens. It never happens. So, like I said, I need to see Gervonta Tank Davis get in the ring with those guys. Now, a Lomachenko versus Gervonta Tank Davis fight, I think, would be a relatively big fight. I think that it would be a great fight, but I'll believe it when I see it. And it's just interesting how Dante, once again, he's so willing to get on the ass of certain fighters for allegedly avoiding guys that he doesn't like in a way, allegedly avoiding that of Stephon Fulton. And he said, well, let's see, if Inoue is going to duck Stephon Fulton and all sort of stuff. When Inoue had shown no signs of ducking Stephon Fulton, he was already on Inoue's ass. And then when it came, to this fight, there's no, criticism once again for Gervonta Tank Davis. And Gervonta's not trying to get in the ring with anybody. He's not trying to get in the ring with Devin Haney. He's not trying to get in the ring with Shakur Stevenson. It doesn't appear that he's really trying to get in the ring with Teofimo Lopez. When Lomachenko was brought up to him several years ago, when Lomachenko was more at the peak of his career, he never called him out. When it comes down to it. So once again, why no criticism for Gervonta Tank Davis? I know the answer, but, it is what it is.
At the end of the day, it's always been up to the fighters to make these fights come to fruition. When Gervonta and Ryan Garcia...
Agreed, and to be quite honest with you, Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation, well, it's somewhat up to the fighters. It's also up to the promotions to a certain degree, but he's partially saying that also because of the Terrence Bud Crawford situation. Because Crawford for years did not sign with the PBC, and it was a very big problem because Bob Arum didn't like working with the PBC, when it came down to it. So that's also another part of the reason why he's stating that. No, Terrence Bud Crawford could have signed with the PBC, and it would have made it 10 times easier. So that's Terrence Bud Crawford's fault. But anyways, I do agree that potentially that, if the fighters want to fight, then the fight will happen. I agree. But, to a certain degree. But this fight could have happened. This fight could have happened 7 years ago. Gervonta didn't want the fight. But it's just interesting, how they won't talk about that.
They wanted to fight against each other. It did not matter that Ryan was with
the two fighters back then, when Lomachenko was at his best, that were avoiding Lomachenko like the plague, were that of Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia. But almost, not a lot of people talk about it. Both of those guys, overall were scared to death of that Ukrainian. Okay? It is what it is. Just the facts of the situation. Now, were there other fighters that were willing to fight him? Yes. Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney and some other guys out there? Yes, absolutely. But Gervonta Tank Davis and Mikey Garcia? No.
Zone, and Gervonta was with PBC. That fight happened because both fighters wanted the fight. So in order for us to get Gervonta versus Vasyl Lomachenko, all we need is both fighters to agree to fight each other. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, and I've always told you guys this, Lomachenko, he is a very dangerous opponent for anyone. And he will definitely be dangerous for Gervonta Tank Davis. But obviously at the same time, Gervonta is going to be extremely dangerous for Lomachenko, especially if he lands a punch clean. The one thing about...
Well, that's going to be a very interesting fight, but the thing is about Lomachenko is that, once again, and I like Lomachenko as a fighter, but the excuses are starting to run out for Vasyl Lomachenko. Just to talk about a couple of points. Like I've had a couple of people in my videos, overall state, like when I was talking about Canelo Alvarez's resume, and they stated, well, how can you state that Caleb Plant and Billy Joe Saunders, that those guys are A grade level fighters because they pretty much step up in class in the biggest fights of their career, they lose. Well, really, Caleb Plant has only ever lost to two clear A grade level fighters, but we'll talk about that later. And Billy Joe Saunders, of course, his only losses ever to Canelo Alvarez. But there's different levels of fighters. There's different levels of A grade level fighters. When you talk about A minus level fighters, you're talking about fighters that can probably beat the shit out of most B grade level fighters and B plus level fighters. But if they're in the ring against another A minus level fighter, it's going to be life and death, or they may potentially lose to a lot of other A grade level fighters. But if they're facing A grade or A plus level fighters, they probably won't beat those guys. Like Danny Garcia, for example, at the welterweight class. He's probably an A minus level fighter because, he can't beat Sean Porter. He can't beat Errol Spence Jr. He can't beat, Keith Thurman. He couldn't beat those guys, even though they were all, maybe a little bit competitive other than the Errol Spence Jr. one. But he's still an A minus level fighter because what Danny can do is that he can still beat Lucas Matisse. He can still beat Amir Khan. He can still beat Robert Guerrero. He can still beat Paulie Malignaggi. He can still beat some of the other guys. That's kind of like how Caleb Plant is, a little bit, or Billy Joe Saunders in my view, or an Andrade or a Jamal Charlo. When it comes down to those are guys that, when they face up against, other A minus level fighters, they could potentially win those A minus level fights, but there's also a potential that they may lose. So that's basically what that means. But, certain people are like, well, what, how can you claim yourself to be an A grade level fighter if in all your big fights you lose? Well, once again, there's different levels of fighters, but the question is about Lomachenko is this. What level is he really on in terms of the all-time great level and in terms of his whole entire career? Because it's starting to look like that Lomachenko, even though he has A-plus level skills in certain categories, maybe he's not the A-plus level fighter overall as what a lot of us once upon a time thought that he was. Because no offense, but Lomachenko, in my view, against both Teofimo Lopez and Devin Haney, now to be fair, those guys are probably a legit two weight classes bigger than Lomachenko, and Lomachenko was able to make them competitive. But in my view, had Lomachenko just really pushed on the gas a little bit more in that fight and not been so afraid of Teofimo Lopez's power, and overall, once again, really went at it a little bit more with Devin Haney, and established certain better, fighting, ways to get in, and really trying to, hurt Devin Haney, he could have won both of those fights. Like I was watching a video, I believe the other day, I believe by Chronicles of Judo 144, and he was doing a video, I believe, about Mr. Canelo Alvarez, and he said that Canelo, even though he's an all-time great fighter, is a fighter to where he's not a guy that sells out. Canelo is a dude to where, if you start beating him, it's a little bit hard overall for him to really start beating you, at least in certain areas, because he's a guy that tries to always be technical. He's not a guy that will go big or go home in terms of really going after fighters. And maybe you can state that about Canelo, especially in the Dimitri Bivol fight, if you really want to, that Canelo, that, he doesn't really want to get stopped, so he's not that type of fighter. Maybe you can state that, I don't know. But if we're really going to give a criticism to a certain fighter really about that, it's probably Vasyl Lomachenko. Because Lomachenko, once again, no offense against him, but once Teofimo and once Devin Haney started at least showing certain counters, especially to the body, Lomachenko just really did not have a whole lot of answers, or he wasn't as offensive as what he should have been. It just is what it is. So once again, the excuse of, that is only going to last on for so long. So once again, we'll see what he can do against Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Tank Davis. We'll see, but he's going to have to be better in those fights. We'll see. He's going to have to really put the, pedal to the metal within those fights. He's going to have to really try to beat them up throughout the whole entire fight. None of this overall, I was, downloading data for 4 rounds. No, he's going to have to be consistent throughout that whole entire fight.
Lomachenko, and he's always been this way, he bruises very easily. So once again, if Gervonta can land punches on him, Loma's face is going to fall apart, and eventually he might end up getting knocked out. But that's only if Gervonta can land clean punches. Once again, that's not easy.
Gervonta's going to land some clean punches. And I can assure you that Lomachenko is going to land some clean punches as well. The question is about Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko. Is he basically going to quit, or is he going to back off as soon as he starts feeling those major power punches against Gervonta Tank Davis? Because that's basically what he did against Teofimo Lopez, at least in the first half of the fight. And then, overall, he started fighting a little bit later on. you know, and I'm not going to say quit necessarily, but, you know, kind of retreat a little bit. Lomachenko is not going to have time in either of these fights. If he's fighting Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Davis, you cannot afford to give these guys many rounds because they're going overall to give them the decision unless you make this a clear unanimous victory. So Lomachenko's going to have to realize that.
To do on Loma, he makes you work extremely hard just to land one clean shot. But I'm going to tell you, since once again, the same fans that were rooting against Devin Haney will be rooting against Gervonta if he does fight Lomachenko, that's what's going to make this fight so much bigger. Because the sport of boxing is based on race, nationality, and pride in that order. And race fans are going to come out by the millions to watch a fight like this because of...
Yes, including you. Dante's Boxing Nation always, he always fucking cracks me up with this race fan bullshit. You know, it's like Joseph Stalin overall criticizing Adolf Hitler for genocide. Like, it's like, dude, like, you're the king of the club. Dante's Boxing Nation is literally the king of the club out of any other race fanboy. You know, it's like, come on.
What is at stake? And Lomachenko's big stoppage win over George Kambosos further promotes a Davis-Lomachenko fight. But first, Davis has to get past Frank Martin, which is not a guarantee he's going to win that fight. This is the first time that he's fighting against an undefeated, slick American fighter with athleticism and a high boxing IQ. With that all being said, I'm...
Very good fighter, but I'm not quite sure if Frank Martin is above the A- level. I'm just not really quite sure if he is, but we'll see.
Wrap this video.
And I'm also not quite sure if he's going to have really the level of power to really threaten Gervonta Davis. Not that he doesn't have good power, but from what I know, I'm just not quite sure if he has super duper explosive power. But I could be wrong. I'd have to see.
That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Let me tell you guys.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video. So the question is that will there be a potential Vasyl Lomachenko versus Shakur Stevenson fight? Or Lomachenko versus Gervonta Davis? I believe that if you're Bob Arum, that you really try to set up the Lomachenko versus Shakur Stevenson fight. Maybe you do Emmanuel Navarrete, but I think that there's other areas where you could promote Emmanuel Navarrete, of course, because he has that Mexican fan base. But, you know, maybe you put Lomachenko in there against Navarrete so Lomachenko can beat up Navarrete probably. You know, overall, and then, get him in the ring against Shakur Stevenson. But like I said, Lomachenko is going to have to be really dominant against those guys. He's going to have to be really dominant. And he has a potentiality to. But he's going to have to adjust his game. Because for as high of a boxing skill set and boxing IQ that Loma has, he's going to have to do a little bit more in those fights than what he did against Devin Haney and Teofimo Lopez. He's just going to have to. It is what it is. And I thought that the Devin Haney fight was a fight that could have went either way. But at the end of the day, once again, Mr. Vasyl Lomachenko, you're not a guy that they want to promote. All right? You're 36 years old. You're a European Ukrainian fighter. All right? A Caucasian Ukrainian, European fighter. That's not someone over that's 36 years old. Do you think that they're really going to want to promote you over Teofimo Lopez, Shakur Stevenson, and Gervonta Davis? Do you really think they're going to give you the edge in the scorecards? Of course not. Because they realize that those fighters overall are the future of the new generation. You know, once again, that's why, Dante, he can state all this stuff about how European fighters, they get the protection even from the judges. All that's bullshit. Because how many European fighters have you ever seen get the edge overall in the scorecards? Tyson Fury didn't get it over Wilder in the first fight. Lomachenko didn't get it over Devin Haney. Andre Ward got the edge over Sergey Kovalev. Overall when it came down to it, Canelo Alvarez got the edge over Gennady Golovkin. When it comes down to it, Brian Castano, who's an Argentinian fighter, a Latino country, but a country that's a little bit harder to promote in terms of the history of boxing, especially compared to Mexico or Puerto Rico, so I mean, come on, like what are we really talking about here? When Josh Taylor, even against Jose Ramirez, like they were trying to rob Josh Taylor in that fight against Jose Ramirez. That's why Bob Arum was so livid. Because he paid some of them judges overall probably to score for Jose Ramirez. That's why those scorecards were so close, even with 2 knockdowns and Josh Taylor winning the majority of the rounds. So once again, this narrative about how the European fighters overall, they have the best hope insurance in the world and the judges are also in it. No, they're not. But once again, these judges a lot of the times are paid usually to give the nod overall to the American fighters. And that's why, it's... when people state that, Inoue should come to America. Why? So he can fight Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez and then possibly get robbed if the fight is close. Like, come on. No. But it is what it is. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank y'all so much for watching, and I'll talk to y'all later. And we'll see where this goes.